Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin. Our guest today is Mr. Josh Nichol. Josh and I will both be presenting at the Best Horse Practices Summit in Lexington, Kentucky this coming October. So I figured I would have a chat with him. That way maybe I'd have a friend to talk to when we're there at the event. Josh, under the guidance of world-class mentors, quickly learned his life's calling. He's continually seeking and developing better methods of creating long-lasting relationships with one of God's most fascinating and beautiful creatures. Driven by a passion for connecting with and understanding the needs of horses, Josh has created a transformative approach to horsemanship, relational horsemanship. Relational horsemanship is built on a foundation of forming a deep connection with our horses by striving to understand their needs and empowering them to perform at peak capacity rather than dominating them. I don't know, Josh. That sounds like some hand-holding kumbaya crap to me. Are you sure that's the way you want to go with it?
You bet it is.
I like
hand-holding kumbaya. I like it.
Well, we start off everything with the lightning round questions, and these are for prizes. So make sure you got your A game coming. All right. What is your favorite way to relax?
My favorite way to relax. I like being on the lake.
Fishing or skiing or just on the water?
Yeah, on the water with my kids. You betcha. I like fishing, but I sure like pulling my kids on the tube and jumping in the water and just being out there.
Absolutely. I grew up on a lake. I used to swim and water ski just about every afternoon. So
cool.
Morning or evening?
Morning.
Bay or sorrel?
Sorrel.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
No, it does not.
Do you like a thick or a thin crust pizza?
Well, that's a bit complex. It depends on the dough. It depends on how it's cooked, but generally I would say thin.
Do you have a pet peeve that you would share with us?
Pet peeve. Chewing with your mouth open.
Okay, that's a good one. You're a dad of young kids, so I can understand how that'd be one of the things on your radar. Yeah. You have a favorite beverage?
Oh, favorite beverage. Favorite beverage. Funny that you're stumping me with that one. I generally don't drink a lot more than water. Really like water. As silly as that seems, makes me sound boring, but
No.
Put some lemon in it. I'm happy.
That sounds good. I read something I thought was kind of funny recently. It was that when you're young, all you want to drink is alcohol. And then when you get old enough to drink alcohol, you need coffee. And then one day you realize that water is actually the adult drink, right? So that makes sense.
Yeah, that's right.
Would you tell us something unexpected about you?
Something unexpected. Well, not a very tall guy. And I played on a university volleyball team.
Okay.
Didn't expect that.
I was not expecting that. No.
Yeah, there you go. I'm playing your game.
That's perfect. Absolutely. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you choose?
That for myself. That's a deal. I had this sense of right away I said what I would like for everybody to have, but what is superpower? To grant people the opportunity to I gotta figure out how to say it. It's not easy to explain. That I could grant people to understand the insides and not judge the outsides.
What now? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you quite.
That I could grant people the ability to see the insides and not judge the outsides.
Oh, okay. All right. I got you. That makes sense. Yeah. We all have our biases that we carry around and our particular lenses that we view the world through, no doubt about it. Thoughts or feelings?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'd like to call the middle on those ones, because I'm about as scientist as I am feeler, and I see such value in both. If I can, I'm gonna run right down the middle on that one.
All right. And I promise this isn't planned. This is actually the next question. Decisive or indecisive?
Oh yeah, there it is. That's also, there's the difference between thoughts and feelings. Decisive or indecisive? I would say ponderously decisive.
I like it. Thoughtful. Right.
Thoughtful. There we go. Yeah.
So then are you a feeler or are you thoughtful?
Yeah, part of me is super feely. I feel like that, being able to feel and sense animals is a big deal, to be able to read and know them. But then also being thoughtful, doesn't let you get too so into the feelings that you're not able to find solid ground. But yet being able to feel is truly important. So yeah, I'm pretty feely, but that scientist really likes me to have scientific method and being able to quantify things and bring clarity to a picture. Yeah, that's not so quick. That's a little deeper question for me, but
Yeah. Order from
yeah.
chaos, right? You have to be able to organize it, and you have to make it understandable, and it has to be some meat and potatoes behind what we're trying to understand. But if you can't feel, then you're not going to deal with a horse very well, because that's all feel. Yeah. So I get it. It's meant to be perplexing on purpose, right?
Yeah. Good.
Do you have a favorite piece of tack or horse related tool?
Oh, favorite piece of tack. Oh, it'd be a saddle that fits. I have a couple saddles that I just feel like this let me get into a horse. That makes all the difference for me. I think hands make a bridle. A bridle doesn't make hands. So, that doesn't matter to me too much on that end. But boy, being able to get into a horse the way my body's built, in a way that I'm not fighting attack, I'd say my saddle.
Do you have like a particular saddle that just is your favorite? Like, I don't mean a generic piece, but like this old weight or that dressage saddle or whatever, that's just like, that's your baby.
Yeah, I've been building saddles, not myself personally, but with a fellow by the name of Andy Knight. He lives in BC, and we've been playing and shifting and building different rigs. And the latest one that we put together is, it's absolutely my favorite. If I can get in on that, I'll always use it unless it doesn't fit a horse. But that's the one I just feel like I never feel at a loss in it, and I love that feeling.
Okay, I'll just pause here. We'll talk about saddles for a minute. So, what seat style is that? What kind of tree is it? Like a Wade or something else, or what?
It's kind of a modified slick fork, so it's built off a Wade, and we've Andy's so great because we sit and visit and talk, and I find, I guess it comes with any territory, but people are, you run into folks that are either real close-minded on what they're doing, or you come up against, real students. And I love visiting with students of the horse. And I feel like Andy's that way with building saddles. He's always excited to hear from guys that are spending lots of time in them. So him and I have really good talks, and then we adjust. And this saddle, it's kind of the closest to, I don't want to say a dressage seat, but a seat that gets you pretty straight, that you can actually ride hours in. And that was always the struggle I've found, is that, a lot of times guys want to get saddles sit in your back far enough that you can ride a lot of hours in them, but you're always getting put back into an uncentered balance point. So it's been an interesting challenge. So we've been playing a lot with the seat, and I feel like now I can just tip back and ride a long time in it, but get right up where I want to be and be in a nice balance point, and feel like I'm in a strong position. So it's a modified Wade as a slick fork, and I really like those rigs.
I find one of the things that I've never understood about saddles is that you could take a typical 16-inch saddle and your average NBA player could adjust those stirrups to get nice and comfortable, but somebody that's 5'6" doesn't have a chance of touching them. And then
Yeah.
freedom of movement in the legs is they always seem to want to use real heavy leather and stuff, and you're fighting the saddle to cue properly rather than I almost want them to feel like an English saddle where you just have two little straps and you can move your legs any way you want, like a duck if you feel like it, and nothing's ever fighting you or binding you down. So that's a trick for sure.
Yeah, you bet.
Do you have?
Yeah, I like to feel like. Sorry, I was just saying I like to feel like there's a certain range where there's a real liberty of movement and then a stability after that. So if you get into a spot, it'll move real free in this certain range, and then after that it's not gonna flop and leave you, so to speak. Like it'll want to be in a certain spot. Anyways, that's just another piece of how we built the inseam on the rigging, so that it has a certain area where it will move super free, and then after that it'll actually stop for you.
Tells you maybe your leg shouldn't be venturing that far out.
Exactly.
Do you have a favorite book or movie?
Oh man, favorite book. It's funny. I like reading. I like books. I would say that Kinship with All Life was one right at the beginning that kind of set the tone for looking at things a little different. I sure like that one. Favorite movie? I don't know if I have a favorite. I like movies that inspire deeper thought and connect you to something else that might be going on. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll stick with that as my favorite book.
Oh, that's good enough. I have found through that question, I'm building myself a nice little book list of books I haven't heard of to go check out.
Yeah, right.
That's a good one.
I'll bet. Hey.
Yeah. Do you have a guilty pleasure?
Guilty pleasure.
You got to crack open a Mountain Dew at 10:15 every morning or anything like that? Or
No, not much of a pop guy. I would say guilty pleasure. Like a gin and tonic every once in a while.
Oh, yeah. All right. I'm right there with you on that. Yep. So since you mentioned that, your fellow countryman Ryan Reynolds, his aviation gin, have you tried that stuff out? I like it a bunch.
No, I have not. I didn't even know we had that going on.
Yep. It's some good stuff. It really is. I like it. I like it quite a bit. I've probably gone through 4 or 5 bottles of it since discovering it.
Really? Okay. Well, good to know.
Do you have a favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
I don't think I do.
Man, you got 2 young sons. I mean, you gotta be all up on the dinosaur end of things, right? Come on.
My youngest is 10 now, and he just recently moved out of dinosaurs. So yeah, he knew them all, and we play with them. But yeah, I don't think I ever had a favorite.
And have you ever had a UFO encounter?
Well, I don't know, but this podcast is getting pretty interesting, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. All right, well, cool. Or what about, are y'all far enough up to see the northern lights or anything like that?
We sure are.
Okay.
They're out all the time. We had a pretty great light show just a couple nights ago. Skies just turn green and red and dances all over the place. It's pretty beautiful.
That's awesome. That's life goals for me. I have never witnessed it, but definitely want to one day.
Really? Yeah, it's very cool.
Well, I'm going to give you 512 points. And the way that our scoring goes, that's the highest score we've ever had, ever. And that entitles you to either an awkward silence or a genuine compliment. So your pick there, whichever you like.
I'm just curious how these are served up. I think that genuine compliment might come in a slighted way. So let's take awkward silence.
Sounds good. All right, that ought to be enough. You're my third person to pick awkward silence, and I love it every time.
Really?
That's my favorite one. So that's what that list of questions. We got to isolate the weird people, and that way we could band together. So it all makes sense.
There you go.
Well,
Find your people.
Josh, why don't you give us kind of the 30,000-foot view of what Josh Nichol horsemanship or relational horsemanship is all about? What's your mission statement and goal?
That's a good one. I think oftentimes when people hear relational horsemanship, they kind of think right away of the real soft side of relationships and being close to horses and all of that stuff. And I'm 100% there. But what I think about relational horsemanship, I think of what it means to be in relationship with. And being in a relationship could be with, what does it mean to be in a relationship with the muscles of a horse, with a bit, with a saddle, with space, with the energy of a horse, with a horse's mind. And I love to think of it that way, because it starts taking away opinion necessarily, because when you're in relationship with, you've built connection with, you understand a thing, and then you're working with that understanding. So it's not really a matter of taking a stand on a way of doing it. It's about being in a relationship. So in relationship, you have to listen to each other, and you have to understand each other, and the horse has to understand you, and you have to understand the horse, and you have to be able to get with each other. So the idea of relational horsemanship is first off, in its definition, is understanding what that means. And then secondly, I prioritize two elements. And the first is, in relationship, there has to be a clear understanding of what a horse needs. And our first step, because the horses didn't come and knock on my door and ask me to go do this stuff that we do, my job is to be able to take care of their needs. So I look to establish that first. And I look at whatever you might call leadership, as much as it's a pretty washed out word now. Generally, it's me being able to set the tone for my horse to be able to feel safe, and that I can take care of their needs and they would feel safe with me. And that sets the tone. So if there's struggles for the horse, if there's what you might call behavioral issues, it generally means there's an unmet need. So instead of looking at the horse like they're misbehaving, you try to figure out what the heck's going on and how you can better meet the horse's need. And then there's the empowerment side, which is then being able to take that relationship and be able to go do stuff. So can I get out there and meet the horse's need and live an adventurous life? For a lot of things we do, we're hardly in the arena long. We're there to do the things we need to get done and to build certain things, but then we're building skills to be able to go out and do jobs. So the empowerment side is then being able to test and grow and kind of push our boundaries and live an expansive life instead of a small one. And then the third part of the element is, what does it mean to understand the athleticism of a horse so that the horse might use their body right? They might, their muscles, bones, and ligaments would all be used in a way that honors what it means to be in relationship with their body, and develop the horse's athletic side, so that we're not just confining them into positions that we desire, but we're understanding what it means to get them to utilize themselves in the best way. So it's being in relationship with the leadership side means to understand that, the empowerment side, and then the athletic side. And then when you get all of those rounded out, you have a pretty cool relationship that's pretty full, which develops relationships, deeper connections, excuse me. And then for folks too, what does it mean to be in relationships with each other? And then how do you figure out what's going on in yourself? And sometimes those things are going to be adding value, and other times we need to make some changes. So trying to live a balanced form of being able to see through the horse, sometimes what's going on for the horse, but sometimes see through the horse ourselves, and that we let the horse help us develop deeper relationships for ourselves. So kind of use that word a lot, but it seems to be the reason that it's taken form that way, because it really is about understanding, having a relationship with yourself, and then understanding the heartbeat of that for horses.
I like it. I'm gonna throw this out there because you're reminding me a lot of this. The theme kind of keeps coming up to it. If this is not a term you want to get deep into, we can just move on. If it's something you want to discuss a little bit, that's fine. But it sounds to me like you're kind of touching a lot on polyvagal nerve theory. Is that a fair assessment, or is that something you're consciously working on, or just so happens y'all are similar?
Yeah, I don't know too much about it. I know that's a common conversation. I kind of understand generally the idea of it. It's not something I'm on purpose trying to connect with, but I think the challenge for me with any of the conversation is I talk a lot about red, yellow, and green lights, and with what we do. So we're cowboying and we're using our horses or working with our horses and doing jobs, and you end up living in that yellow light quite a bit. And this threshold term has kind of gotten, I feel like, I don't know how to say this in a way where I can honor what I mean and not sound like I'm cutting corners for anything, but I feel like horses need to be mentored through how to handle the challenges of life. And generally, they would believe that they didn't want to. So, if you push or challenge somebody or something, generally we would want to back off, but we need to be mentored in a way where we can trust and learn how to be pushed and how to handle things. So there's certain parts of us that are not going to necessarily stay perfectly calm, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're pushed into fight or flight or you're tipped off the edge. So the conversation for me can sometimes be not so black and white, not so black and white. It's not that all of a sudden the horse is lost their ability to regulate. So I like to think about yellow space, not just red and green, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So no, I like that.
Some differences there for me, because I feel like we all need to learn how to handle our yellow light to grow.
Sure. Outside of the comfort zone. I find that commonly there are some trainers that seem to be in full-on avoidance mode a lot of times when they run into problems. They kind of, we're just going to do a little circle here and pretend like he didn't refuse that jump or whatever, and we're just going to move on. And to me, they train useless horses. That's one I can never depend on. And I think what you're saying about mentor and all is right on. I've always viewed training a horse kind of like a parent-child relationship, where there are times when they need to crawl in your lap and get a hug, and there's times when you need to say, nope, you got to handle this. We're gonna do this now. You're not gonna back off. We got to hold your feet to the fire a little bit. So I love it. Yep, yellow light.
Well, and it's always the balance of the camp of wanting to back off would focus on people holding a horse to the fire in a way that deregulated or dysregulated the horse. So they held him in a place where the horse got scared. And then we would, the one camp would say, no, those horses need to figure that out. And they would let him get scared and they'd put him in there. And then this camp would look at that and say, oh, no, the horse can't learn now because the brain's off. So I think the balance of it is kind of, and I guess that's feel and timing of, when has the horse lost their ability to think? Well, then that's on me. And that's how I look at it. So if I've pushed my horse far enough that they can't think, I haven't prepared them well enough to handle that. Not that I haven't prepared them and I should just go back to the round pen and do circles again, but how do I then build them up to prepare them to handle those things? But be willing to back off if I need to. So if my horse gets to that spot, that's on me. But if my horse isn't growing, that's also on me. Yep. I'm not holding them in there, long enough to process and think through that. Because in the end, so I think about this for my friends. I don't have many friends, like people that I look to, but the ones that do, they've kind of been to war and back. They know what it takes to stand in and be there for you if you need, and handle it when it's not easy, but if everything has to stay just right for the horse to be okay, well, that's not the horse I'm picking when I'm in trouble, because they're generally going to leave you. So anyways, it's kind of it's a more challenging conversation, because the common theme of the world today is really about trying to keep everything quiet. And I differentiate quiet and peace, because just because things are quiet doesn't mean there's peace within. Peace comes with the ability to process life in a way that allows you to deepen your roots. Quiet just means that you're not getting pushed.
But some of the most damaged horses out there are quiet. It doesn't mean that they're good. It means they're quiet, right?
That's right.
So until they're not quiet.
Right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? So we're talking a little bit about work and cows and stuff like that. From the videos and things that I have seen of you, though, you seem to have a pretty I would say you lean even more toward dressage than anything else, classical type dressage. So why don't you tell us how that mix came about and what kind of weird amalgamation of all of that you've turned into?
Yeah, you betcha. We kind of talked about in those quick questions there that I'm logical and feely. It's a funny combination because generally I would say people are more extreme on one edge. And so when I got started, where I grew up, I grew up in Ontario, it's quite a ways out east, and then we moved out west when I was about 12. And this is cowboy country. Like Alberta's a little bit like your Texas, probably, if there was a comparison. It's really much more western out here, and got to start hanging out with different guys. And I often think that the way North America was cultivated in its horsemanship was primarily ranch based, and the whole idea about horses was just to get them as a tool to get cattle moved, and which is where bronc busting and all of that stuff came, because it was just about getting these horses on the payroll so they could go out and do jobs. So much of our horsemanship stemmed out of a more submissive base, because it's about just being able to get on them, get them bent, get them to where they're giving their body, and then use them. And I think that kind of stems through a lot of the horsemanship today, but it's so really about speed. And for myself personally, that kind of got involved in a lot of that as I got started, but it just didn't feel right to me. And that was where that feeler part of me just wasn't feeling okay, that there was parts that the horses were just kind of giving up or quitting or inside themselves not okay, but doing their job. And so that just got me hunting. And that feeling part of me was just, when it wasn't satisfied, I would struggle to just kind of do it anyways. I was raised to be not to necessarily just give in to whatever the popular opinion was. It's, a free thinking mind was encouraged. So I think that really served me. And that just got me hunting. And then soon you start finding people that you're inspired by and ride with. So I was pretty lucky enough that in my mid-teens, I got to ride with Harry Whitney for about 3 years. Through a 3-year period, I rode with him for about a year. And that's at a really neat base of just perspective and philosophy around horses, and traveled in the back of his horse trailer and just got on as many horses as I could. And he handled me through my flailing teenage years and overconfident, bold, whatever kid that just wanted to crawl on anything I could. That was just so formidable for me. And then that started to grow, and ended up training on my own, and then feeling limitations, and just really feeling like there was, it kind of came to me quite, in that time, that there's these people focusing on how a horse moves, and there's also people focusing on how a horse feels. And so it seems like there was kind of two big pillars there. So then hunting heavily, with those two pillars of, just trying to figure that out about getting a horse to a place where they were okay. But then realizing when you're trying to get them to move, if you're using a submissive approach in how they move, then you're actually hyperflexing or overbending, or, that you're not honoring the body. So then that got me feeling, trying to feel the body of the horses being asked to do weird things that I would never put my body in. We would never do that to a human, but, we're doing it to a horse. And it's because those kind of contradictions just really, really got me going. So then started, I would say I'm a high achiever. I really like to figure things out at a more pure form or a higher form. I don't just settle easily, which has in some ways served me, in some ways been, probably my wife's plague. But so then, I just started chasing higher approaches to horsemanship, and really trying to understand what brought him peace is a rabbit hole in itself, because you can just take that and go quite a long ways down. And then understanding their bodies, that's what drew me to the classical style. And then more of the high school cowboy deal as well, just trying to find guys. And I've learned this over the years, is that it really isn't about what you do. It's really how you're doing it. And I learned that the most. It's just to honor the horse's body and understand how they need to move. And then had more of the classical system for me wasn't about positions and movements, but was about understanding flow points and access lines when the horse is in true balance. And that changes everything about it. So anytime you're trying to submit the horse into a movement, you're confining them mentally and then taking them physically. So now would be a more dominance-based approach. But as you're able to kind of meet the need, feel the mind in the muscles, and that's kind of a whole conversation in itself, but and then understanding how the horse can form their balanced mental awareness in their physical body, the horse starts revealing their body to you, and then you start shaping muscle around that. So that just kept the artfulness of that just kept pulling and pulling, and you have moments just like a great golf swing where it's all of a sudden everything feels right, and then you start trying to put those swings together a little more and find progressions, and then you're starting to develop, I would say, horse's muscle instead of human created muscles, what the horse's body desires to look like to carry weight rather than confined positions.
Josh, I apologize. We were just interrupted by my ever-present technical difficulties. You were talking about the relationship, I believe, of frames that the human might want to put a horse into because we find it aesthetically pleasing versus the frame that the horse needs to be in because of their own biomechanics. And I'll let you continue on as best you can after the 5-minute interruption.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. Just kind of getting in on this idea of, we kind of started that piece with talking about making or dominating the mind of, or the body of a horse, trying to make them do what we wanted. And a lot of that comes with overflexions and really being able to make the body do things, disengage the hindquarters, over focus on some of these elements. And it really gets you to where that horse is going to do what you say all the time because you're taking their body from them. But again, that can leave this feeling of wanting in the mind of a horse where there's this, there's a real sense that you're diminishing the mental elements of a horse to get what you want from them physically. And again, I like to believe that there's this way in life that kind of all things seem to follow. There's a flow, and that it's on some level you would believe that it should be right by a human and right by a horse, right by a dog, right by you. You wouldn't necessarily kind of act a certain way with a certain creature, but then feel it's okay over here. So, just being able. So generally, what I say is, if you're taking the body to try to get the mind, you're forcing yourself you're forcing the body to get the mind. Generally, you're going to have to put the body into a containment because the mind would be trying to get out. So by honoring the mind and learning what the horse needs, then they generally provide themselves. And this is where I really did a lot of fun work. I do certain work in the round pen or loose and work towards the liberty work, because then the horse kind of brings their body to the table. They kind of present themselves. And then slowly you start shaping what's given instead of trying to confine. And what I found in the process of that was that all of a sudden the horses were moving in certain ways. There were certain things they weren't doing. They were wanting to be in certain ways as they started to move, as they started to demonstrate where their positions were. And then you can start shaping that. And that's where some of the classical movements came in, because there wasn't really a lot of confinement necessarily with some of in the art of classical dressage. I see that it's just a funny thing how the world goes now, is that everything can be done with different mind frames. And you have some people who do things with ways, they can take classical dressage, but they're doing it with a real dominant approach. And you can take the heart of that and it changes because of the way you're doing it. And you can also then take somebody, and I watch this all the time because, my kids compete in rodeo. And for some people that's, oh, how could you ever do that? Well, but if you take the right mentality, your horses can be real happy and enjoy the speed events. That's not, so it isn't really about the thing, it's the way you go about it. So that in itself really inspired the heartbeat behind how I work towards getting my horses' minds, but also understanding their body. And that drew me to the art of classical dressage, which is kind of what got me into that. When you hear and you can see it in my tones and in my teaching, because the idea is I always talk about self-carriage before collection, because I think collection is one of those pieces that can get muddy too, where we're trying to kind of put the horse into what you might call a frame, but the horse really hasn't shown you where their balance points are yet. They haven't shown you where they want to move. Where's their neutral? When they start to use themselves, what do they do? And you need to kind of shape that and use that. And then, you're mentoring their body into higher postures, not necessarily making it happen. And then I look at collection as, putting muscle around self-carriage. You're not necessarily putting them into a frame, because a frame is an entirely separate conversation but building muscle around self-carriage, of mentoring the horse into positions that they're carrying themselves and developing that more and more is a process. It's not about making the horse do a thing. So anytime you're touching on that whole making piece, really forcing your hand on something, generally we're getting away from the knowledge of the mind and the body, and we're just imposing ourselves upon them in too much of a dominant way. Again, the conversation gets slightly muddy when we talk about yellow light, because there has to be clarity developed in that. Goes back to what we talked about earlier, is that if the horse's mind, if the horse becomes scared, that's on us. And if the horse's world is small, that's on us. So it's about being able to develop a philosophy that allows the horse to understand how to be challenged and to actually be okay with being challenged, to kind of see the success and the feelings of being challenged and succeeding. And I feel that's for us too. When we're pushed a little bit, when a mentor knows how to push us and then we succeed, oh man, you start feeling pretty powerful. And there's no greater feeling for me than to feel that happen to my horses. When the world starts to come apart and they start feeling powerful instead of weak, man, I want to give that to everything.
Absolutely. Well, you might be the guy that we've been looking for. I've studied dressage a fair bit myself, enough where I understand what they're talking about. But for the life of me, the more I listen to them, I'm just sitting there pondering, why on earth are they describing this way? It's like they're trying to make it impossible to understand, but you seem to have a pretty good blend of bringing it in there and make it a little more rational and approachable. And I think it definitely needs that. One of my pet peeves, of course, is behind the vertical. And that's one of those things. When I look at, there are actually a decent number of clips of Nuno Oliveira on YouTube, and you can see him riding in one hand, smoking a cigar, and the horse is relaxed doing a piaffe, and the reins are not, the horse doesn't look like a coiled spring ready to explode and jump over the little 8-inch fence at any moment. And that's what it's supposed to be. And a lot of these people, there is no comfort or relaxation in that horse whatsoever. And I wonder how you can be around horses your whole life and miss that. But apparently it's doable. So.
Yeah. It's a funny thing. And I think that's where that whole, dominance element comes in, is when the horse is supposed to do what you say and the horse is supposed to listen, and that's a perspective you have. It's not about us understanding what they need. It's about them doing what they're told. And I call it emotional horsemanship or reactive horsemanship, when we impose our negative emotional interpretations upon the horse's behavior, and that justifies emotional pressure. So I can then be an outlet. My pressure my emotions can outlet themselves through pressure justifiably. It's like, it's really, really becomes really bad. And we've all seen it. But now the confinement and the dominance actually feels very justified because of my interpretation. And I feel like that's where that sways. And when you take a different interpretation combined with a different knowledge of the body, it produces an entirely different look. And that's the beautiful piece. I found myself a lot of times spending that with my students, is trying to, first off, transform perspective, because without aligned perspective, our conversation is already over. Because if we're not looking through a similar lens, then it's very challenging to have a conversation about process or purpose, because we're on different planets, so to speak. Because a lot of times when people are doing that, they feel 100% justified that that's exactly what you should do, because that horse shouldn't be able to get away with that, and they need to listen, and therefore it's okay for me to use this bit and to use this confinement. And then you look at someone, like Nuno is obviously, we don't know the heart of Nuno or the way, but we observe his horses, and we could observe his presentation and the energy that he had with the horses. And it gives insight. You can follow that trail, and it gives insight to his knowledge. And, and this was a simple thing. It's complex, but simple. But, in a dominance-based approach, the neck forms the picture of collection. And in a carried approach, collection is demonstrated by how the hind end sits, not based on what you do in the confinement. So by taking the neck, you're taking the horse's senses away from them. So the horse can't see, they can't look. It's submissiveness. So the more, generally I found, and the reason I would think that past the vertical bugs you is because your feel gets twinged by it, because it's not allowing the horse to find themselves. It's confinement. And anyways, again, it's been in our genes for years to confine horses just to get them to do the things we want. It stems right from our history. So a shift is necessary there for sure.
Well, hopefully some education will solve some of the problems. So I understand. I've done the competitive world thing. I don't really have any desire to do that anymore, but I get the desire to win and to compete. But the unfortunate side is that it breeds taking a good concept and pushing it to an extreme until 10 years later, it's a perversion of what it originally started out as, and it becomes unrecognizable of what it was supposed to be. And then, like you say, people have these kind of blinders on and they feel totally justified. And 10 years later, it gets pushed even further. And you're just sitting there going, what are we doing here, y'all? I mean,
yeah.
I really like that. You touched on collection a little bit right there, and I would say that is one of those areas where, in my experience at least, there isn't common ground as to what that is. Or at least I feel I often see people chasing something that I wouldn't call collection at all. So you were talking about the hind end. One of the definitions I have heard is that collection is lowering the three main joints of the hind leg. And that's fairly simple. It's fairly straightforward. It is quantitative, so that's not as objective a measure as something else might be. But I wish we spent more time talking about that. I see tons of horses that are running around flexed at the pole, but they're not collected at all. They're all on the forehand. And again, you're kind of, you see how nice and collected he is? No, I don't. I don't think he's collected at all. You know, what are you really aiming at there? So would you like to talk a little bit more about collection and self-carriage? I like what you said there about muscle built around self-carriage. That would be something. I have some pretty strong feelings on self-carriage. And again, I would say that most of the time when I see it attempting to be demonstrated, I don't think it's actually what is being demonstrated, kind of like collection. But what would be your thoughts there?
Well, it all comes down to interpretation, and that's half of the conversation, right? So you can, if self-carriage is being defined by pressured lightness, which means, because there's a conversation of self-carriage where we're just saying the horse is not pushing on the reins. Well, there's a good chance that horse just knows if they push on the bit, they're going to get a mouthful of bit. So they've got their chin tucked, so they're not pushing. And we call that self-carriage because the reins are light, but the horse is rounding their neck. Well, that's a different definition of self-carriage. And I say that's based on pressured lightness. So lightness comes in two ways. It either comes because the horse is avoiding they're avoiding being pressured, or they're sitting. And so those are, so it really comes down to being able to say, that. So I really like doing this with people when we're having these conversations, is it's like, okay, so explain to me what that term means to you. And then I'll explain what it means to me. And then we might, in the end, decide that we have different beliefs or different definitions, and we want to go about it differently. But it's challenging when, it's like, well, you think that's right and I think this is right. Well, I think the change comes within being able to actually mine out the conversation of definitions. So this, the classical piece too, this, rocker points and balance are just critical to me to understand. So everything has rocker points and balance points. So as humans, we have these points where if we get into a rocker point, like the rocker point would be where, you take the old broomstick on your finger and you can find the center point of it. And the rocker point is where if you change it from that center point, it's going to go one way or the other. Well, a horse has that laterally and longitudinally. So if the horse's head is at their rocker points, if they go just a little bit up, they're going to lean back. If they go just a little bit down, they're going to go forward. If they go too high up, they're going to tighten their back. If they go too far down, they're going to tighten their back as well, because now they're compensating. It's no different than you and I. If we lean a little bit, no problems. But if we lean a little too far, something has to compensate. So in the work, the first initial key is that self-carriage, the basic balance point of self-carriage, is when you're at the center rocker points, laterally and longitudinally. So the horse isn't falling left and right, and they're not falling forward and back. And you can find where they want to be. So that's their neutral balance point. From there, you need to be able to feel release and throughness. And so that's the relaxation of the top line. And this has incurred, as you said earlier, a lot of good concepts get taken too far, where you have horses releasing their back, but now they're dragging their nose on the ground for very long periods of time. Well, now the horse is getting to where if the head goes down, but the head goes down too far, now you've taken a really good concept of relaxation and taken it into a four-handed posture. So you want the back to release, but you also want to be considering their balance in the process. So there are certain things that, and I also say that everything has a pro and a con. So nothing is like all good. Everything has a pro and a con. So you could take a horse's head up and it's going to be awesome for a couple seconds. But if you leave it there, all of a sudden their back's tight. You take their head down and it's relaxation, and that's great. And now all of a sudden it's four-handedness because you left it there. So for me, this whole idea of leadership is that I look at the horse's top line as their relational, or their defensive line, excuse me. So the top line is more of the horse's defensive line. When the horse gets worried, they get tight and they take their body for their own defense. And then they fall into four-handed postures and they kick their sacrum forward and their back legs kick out. So if the horse's mind, and that's why I say the horse's mind is the gateway to the body, because only when the top line is relaxed through understanding the release of the mind and how that forms through the body, then the back relaxes. But again, if the head gets too low now you're in that four-handed position. So then the body has to start compensating again. And generally the way the body compensates is that it tightens the back and pulls the sacrum forward, which kicks the back legs out. Now it's impossible to have any articulation of the back legs. So this is where the subtle movements start coming in. And I talk about feeling the throughness of a horse through the top line, but then also through the lateral line of feeling the shoulder articulate the pole and the pole activate the inside hind leg. And I do this through balance. So if you just take a horse and you're walking with them and you just gently move the shoulder slightly to one side, the head is going to come to the other side because the horse is always going to seek equilibrium. And I'm never talking about pushing them so far that they're out of balance, but just shifts. So as the shoulder moves a tiny bit, the head moves a tiny bit, and then the pole can rotate. And as the pole rotates, the inside hind leg can step. And now you're starting to feel the throughness that can start developing self-carriage. So we need to be able to feel how the body honors itself. If you want the head to do a thing to connect to the hindquarters, or the shoulder to do a thing, you have to be able to match them up in fluid balance points. So I spend a lot of time with that. And that principle actually develops the knowledge of movements as you move to anything lateral. So shoulder in, turn on the forehand, leg yield, the simple movements and the complex movements. But everything stems off of retaining the throughness, not just putting the horse in that position, because a horse can go into the position of shoulder in and still be tight through their top line and kicking their hindquarters out, not necessarily coming through. So being able to feel the top line let go, but then also understand how the shoulders can be in relationship with the pole and the pole in relationship with the hindquarters. Now you have a throughness with a relaxation, and now you're developing a mental self-carriage demonstrated through the body, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And that's when you start seeing the suspension of the hind legs. So now the hind legs start tracking up. But the only way those hind legs can track up, and I believe this to be actually a spiritual thing, and as much as I get into that spiritual piece, it's like, you don't get to have the body without earning the mind. And it's really interesting that the way the horse's body was built is the only way they can really use themselves is if you're taking care of how they feel. Because if the horse is feeling, taken or defensive, they lock their body out from your availability. But as soon as they start to feel safe, they start to feel, they understand how to deal with things. They provide their body, but now their body can actually articulate in the correct way. So it's like, there's just no way possible. And that came to me years ago, which I just was so thankful for. Anytime you're trying to force the body to do a thing, you're taking what you weren't given, and the collection can't ever come, which is then when there's a fork in the road right there. Okay, I'm not getting the thing I want, and people end up making a decision based on how they're going to handle it. And if you're going to piece, but if you observe that at that moment when your horse is not doing the thing that you're going to start taking and making, that develops an entirely different look. And I feel like that's the road. There's a million tributaries off of that line. And a lot of it comes with watching people doing certain things. And then the other one, really turns you into, and I actually feel a lot of people can become, I call it relationally debilitated. And I'm seeing it a lot right now in the world, is that people desire relationships so much and they don't want the horse to be dysregulated or to see a problem. So every time that happens, they don't know what to do. So they back away because they know they don't want to do the thing that makes the horse scared. But so I call it relational debilitation. And that's the risk of turning left. But the risk of going right is a more dominance based. So for there, you have to swallow your feelings and you just have to force. Doesn't matter how the horse feels, you just feel justified to make. But on the other side, you're honoring the horse. The horse is no longer nervous or scared, but you can feel debilitated because you can't push any buttons. You can't make them upset, or and it becomes so there's a pro and a con on each side. I'm learning. In the beginning, I would have said turning left is the righteous view, and taking care of the horse's needs and all of these things, and it's all very good, but it's so important to not lose the empowerment. And that's the piece that I spend a lot more time on. I used to only talk about leadership and athleticism, and now I talk about leadership, athleticism, and empowerment. Because the empowerment piece talks about the yellow light. What does it mean to live honorably in a space where we're challenging each other and we have integrity for each other? And I feel like that's what we should all be doing, is to be able to, if you had something for me and you're like, hey, Josh, this is a thing I've seen, and I want to bring that to you. You're like, why are you doing that? Or what is that all about? Boy, to be able to take that like iron on iron is just so good for us. But when we can't be pushed, or we can't handle anything, it really makes our world small because we're not able to grow. So
yep,
that's a little deviation from where I was heading, but that is kind of that's an important piece to the puzzle.
That's okay. We can go full on societal offset here. That's no problem. I mean, we definitely are at a point where, like when I was a kid, I don't ever remember anyone insinuating that you had a right to not be offended. If you can't risk offending somebody, then how can you have any kind of meaningful conversation whatsoever? I'm a big fan of your country's Jordan Peterson. Yeah. I think you should have to spend about 3 years of high school listening to him and his lectures. But one of the things that your talk of the top line and all brought to my mind, I'm predominantly known as a colt starter. It's not all I am, but that's kind of what I've gotten pigeonholed as for the most part.
Sure.
One of the things I love about starting colts is that they're very literal. If you walk up to the colt and he leans away from you, then that colt's mind is on escape right now. He's ready for any little sign, and he's going to exit stage left if that sign comes. That to me is kind of what the top line talk that you're doing is. Whenever you're overflexing a pole, or you're putting a horse in a position where he's not balanced anymore, now he's gotten on the defensive side. If we wanted to think the nervous system and all, you've basically taken him out of that parasympathetic thinking nervous system, and you've pushed him somewhat down the road of the sympathetic nervous system, and now he's threatened and defensive and postured. He's certainly not learning as well as he could be learning, because half of his brain is on, what if I have to bail here and get away from you? And I kind of feel like sometimes it's unavoidable that we're going to reach points like that throughout the training of a horse. And if every time something like that happens, you bail, like you're saying, I call that paralysis by analysis, where I don't know what to do, so I'm going to back off. Well, you could inadvertently have just reinforced that behavior. And now when we go to fix it next week, it's going to be even more ingrained than it was today, rather than kind of having the fortitude to push through it a little bit. And I'm a little more of a push through it guy. But I understand exactly what you're saying. If you're totally unaware that happened, and you're totally unaware that it means the horse is defensive and has lost part of his ability to learn and everything, then you're going to wind up creating a time bomb rather than a comfortable, relaxed, balanced horse that actually has access to his athleticism. And on a pragmatic side, you're guaranteed to have some physical problems with that horse down the road too. You're going to wind up with kissing spine, or many of these other debilitating problems that we wind up with because a horse has been asked to hold a tense posture for 3 years. He has had no blood circulation to his loin, and eventually that's going to catch up to you. So I like it. I like it a lot. I do think we're probably at the spot where we need to acknowledge our sponsor. And my wife got this sponsor for us, so I'll just read what she wrote here. Our sponsor for this episode is Chesterfield's Stud Ranch. Are you in need of a true stallion in your life? We have a full-service breeding, and has that been a problem for you? At Chesterfield's Stud Ranch, we exist to satisfy all the fillies. Located just off of I-12 and I-55 April, is this the male strip club in Baton Rouge? You promised me you were never going back there, baby. Come on now. It's not cool. All right. I think I'll be returning their money for this episode. I'm sorry about that, Josh. I might have to have a little conversation with my wife after this one's over with. Okay.
So you got
We got a little deep there, so we needed a little lightening up.
there you go.
Why don't you talk with me a little bit about cow working and stuff? What sort of environment do you have up there in Alberta? I know down here in Louisiana, we're hot, humid, and flat as a pancake. Are you in a mountainous area? And I'm sure you're getting a lot more snow and stuff than we do up there.
I'm pretty thankful. My neighbors are one of the bigger ranchers in our country, and I've worked for them for probably 25 years now. Sometimes, in my early 20s, I was working there pretty full time, and then as time went on, I just worked there less as I've got prioritizing other things. We're right where the prairies blends with the boreal, so it's poplar trees and getting into spruce trees, and in the lower ends it's kind of swampy in spots, and you see lots of black spruce, but then it opens up into fields. So we have southern Alberta. You go a little south and a little east, and it opens up into a lot of prairie land. Saskatchewan is very, very prairie and farmlands. Go a little ways east or west, and you're into the foothills, and then a little farther east and you're up into the Rocky Mountains. So we're at a really neat spot where, there's a kind of a transition phase, mostly ranching, and then some logging as you head a little farther north. And then the oil and gas sector is kind of just north of us as well. So beautiful country. I love the trees. It's really, anybody who's, really into working cattle, more from the horseman side is working dogs as well. So I like to train coolies as well. With the trees and the way the country is, you're not able border collies.
Okay. Now see, there's a Canadian pronunciation I've never come across. We would call them collies. So I'm familiar with the A's and the oots.
Oh yeah.
But okay. There's a little tickle for me. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I legitimately was not sure what you had just said. So, okay.
No worries. I think that's fun. Just with the trees in the country, if you're not running dogs, you're taking a lot longer than needs to be done. So I think that sums up my joy, I think, is, training horses to be able to do good cow work and then train dogs as well and working cows. So that kind of connection is my jam. And then kind of got into helping folks as I started teaching clinics and, training horses and teaching clinics, and that kind of took off on its own. But my own passion is that kind of three-part deal: horses, cattle, and dogs.
I know exactly what you're talking about there. And one fellow on a good horse with a couple of good dogs can get a whole lot done.
Yeah. I was pretty blessed to ride with some pretty good horsemen at an earlier age. In my early 20s, I worked at a ranch with two guys that they had 3 dogs each, and they pretty much ran the whole ranch. And so when I started, I had my horses, but I didn't have any dogs. So I got started with those boys, and boy, that was just a huge blessing, because they were some of the best hands around, and I didn't even know it at that point.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your offerings for your customers right now? I know you do some video conferencing stuff, and you've got some programs that are kind of set up on a weekly basis, as well as your clinics and all. So why don't you lay the gamut out for us?
Sure. When I started, honestly, I love seeing people succeed. I really do feel there's so much joy in being able to help horses succeed and people succeed. And then, I started training for the public, and slowly that got me recognizing that, the horses weren't necessarily the majority of the issues. Mostly it was people's interpretation of the horses and then how they were handling them. So it got me teaching. Well, that kind of took off, and, I've traveled quite a bit and do clinics, but then it got to a place where I was only going one place a year. Well, then you're not really helping folks again. And that became another problem for me, as you would see repetition in the things you would have to be doing because you weren't spending enough time with people. That got me to the point where I started an online website, and I did that. I guess that started, 3 or 4. I guess it's now six years we've been doing it. But just giving people access to have more opportunity to learn. I would say I'm not trying to convince anybody of my style. I just kind of present it, and if it speaks to you, then I want to be able to make sure you have enough access to my work to learn and grow. So then I started the online membership site, where I was just building content and building progressions for people to follow and then keep learning. And I found a huge value in that, being able to work with people, but then they could continue their learning online, and found lots of value. But the hole in that was also then that sometimes they would do the work, but they couldn't make it happen in their own house or at their own farm. So then I started a deal for myself where I would do online learning, where you would meet with me and I'd watch your videos, and we would, just monthly, you'd get 2 sessions a month. And that just took off like crazy. Well, then I started bringing on more of my own students to be instructors as well. So now I've got 4 or 5 different instructors that people can get the help when you get stuck. There's no reason for you to get stuck and get hung up. You can connect with somebody. And we found a lot of value in that. And that's all paid content. But then we also wanted to build up the YouTube channel so people had free access. I didn't want people to feel like if you want anything, you gotta pay for it. So we also wanted to be able to build that. So some of the demos and stuff I've done, and then just different expos we've been to, we've put a lot of that content on YouTube so people can access that. I generally encourage people to go there first, because I really don't like it when people make a purchase and they don't really like what they purchased. So I'd prefer people to be able to go through all my YouTube content, and I absolutely love it, and then jump on the membership if you're pretty sure you want to dial in. And yeah, that's been kind of where we're at now, as I generally encourage anybody who's keen on my work to check out the YouTube channel. If you like that, jump on the membership, and to come to a clinic, but do some learning online first, because while you learn so many pieces, so then we get to the clinic, man, we just take off, because you're already dialed in on the terms, and you've already been trying things. But if people just come to a clinic cold, we spend the first 3 days just understanding each other's terminology and trying to work through some of the kinks. And so that's been a real fun thing for me to watch people grow. And that's kind of the way we've been working at doing it.
What I find in clinics that even for people that are very familiar with me, sometimes you get the question of, well, I've heard everything that you have to say. Why would I need to come ride with you at a clinic? What I find very commonly is that what the real benefit is that we get to watch their horse and diagnose the real problem, because a lot of times what they think is going on and they've been working on for 6 months isn't really what's going on. And that's where I think that, it's difficult to replace the experienced eyes of a horseman, because it's very easy to waste 6 or 8 months of your life in this deal, or years even. Do you find that to be true as well?
Oh, 100%. I think for all of us, shoot, I just love it when I have people that I respect in the industry that are flying through my country, because I want their eyes on my horses, because I'm married to myself. I can't see. It's common to me. It's used to me. I'm used to it. So the things I'm doing wrong, I feel that it's wrong, but I can't see it because I'm not getting somebody's eyes on me. So I just think the idea of having eyes on us is a horseman's tool. That's like a tool in your kit, is that we all need to have someone else's eyes on us, someone we respect, and we should have it as common as possible, because the longer we go without it, the more we just get kind of pigeonholed in our own stuff. So I look at that as just a skill, and a lot of people struggle with that, but they struggle with the vulnerability of that. And I get that, but really, when you really want to grow, man, you want to put yourself in those vulnerable positions as often as possible, because other thing is that's what you're asking your horse to do all the time. And I look at that, it's like we want to ask our horses to be vulnerable and do what they're, not be scared and do these things. But shoot, we won't put ourselves out there very often. And, we live a pretty closed little bubble, and, not necessarily opening ourselves up to other people's opinions and what that feels like. So anyways, I kind of look at that 2 ways. I think that's a tool. That's a tool that we need to keep open to. And on the other side, it's also us creating a different frequency in our energy. And that's a little bit of a thing for me is, you can talk to some people and right away if they're open and, accessible, a kind of person, or if they're shut off and closed. And it's not really by their words, it's by their feelings. And you know how horses study your feel. You know, you walk up to a horse, they know they know the kind of person or what's going on for you real fast because they feel you. So I think by the way we live our lives, we're also being an example to our horses. Not maybe just an example, but we create an environment that allows them to feel safe because we're already doing the things that we're asking them to do. They can feel us doing that. And I really try to live by that.
I like that. Yeah. Very few of us read horses for a living, but all horses read people for a living, right?
Yeah, right on. Yeah. Good words.
Let's talk a little bit about the summit, because that's kind of what brought us together. What are you going to be demonstrating or talking about at the summit?
Yeah, it seems like that, you know, just chatting with Maddie and kind of getting a dial on what the priorities are. As I really do feel like I really support the desire, which is, you know, to develop a safe place for learning and the desire to grow and collaborate and connect. And I really feel like that speaks to me. And I was gonna, you know, I'm gonna probably give a little lecture, and then I'm gonna end up trying to do one session on helping people understand the mind of a horse and just the interaction. So, you know, what does a horse need in any one moment when they struggle? What's going on? And just trying to change some interpretations around that, you know. So that'll be one. And then the other is to start understanding form and function. What does it mean to ask horses questions in a way that you can start differentiating a horse not able to do a movement and a horse, you know, what does it look like when they're moving right? What does that feel like? Trying to understand the pathways of flow to self-carriage. So just starting to acquaint ourselves with the difference of when something is the horse struggling mentally, and then what does it look to mentor the body physically. You know, pretty big tasks to dive into with just a short session, but really I look at these as opportunities just to create thought. Conferences and demos they're not about, you know, trying to get this massive change out of a horse, because that's not fair to the horses. They didn't know when they woke up in the morning that that's what they were up for. They didn't sign up for that. They just, you know, someone just asked them to show up and they did. So, you know, I try to do my best to honor the horse in that short period of time, but then just try to open people's eyes to a certain way and speak to a desire. I find for myself, I'm not looking to convert anybody. I'm just trying to find my students, and I want everybody to find their mentor. So sometimes that's me, and sometimes you know, I'm going to help somebody find you, because maybe you're going to speak to them in a different way and it's going to speak to their heart. But I feel like through our teachings, you know, we find our people because there's something in our words that speaks to them on a deeper level. I feel like through these demonstrations, that's really what you're doing, is you're helping inspire people, you're helping them learn something new and then find their track. Sometimes that might be that they say, dang, I don't want to go watch that guy again. That's not my deal. And that's actually important for folks. You need to learn that I'm not your deal so that you can get your deal sooner. So if I truly care, I'm trying to help you find it, not necessarily needing you to support me, because I've never found that to serve anybody in the end either.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of view us all like different flavors of ice cream. Some people like vanilla, some people like Rocky Road, some people like mint chocolate chip, and there's nothing wrong with whatever your tastes happen to be. I do find, like you've mentioned several times,
right,
the style aspect. And I really like when, like, I don't know if I've watched enough of you riding yet to really have your style dialed in. But I love when you can see one horseman ride 10 different horses, and then you see the commonality among them and what that person's style really is. But even beyond that, like even if you're a dressage rider and I'm not, and not you, but just a generic somebody from a very different discipline or whatever, like always recognizes like. You can still tell whether that person is the kind of horseman that you appreciate and would aspire to be, or whether you don't really care to watch their next demo, you know. And I've really always found that to be so interesting, that horsemanship level thing really permeates all disciplines and all events, because we're all really dealing with horses.
Yeah.
Which brings me to a question I'll ask you. I had this asked of me not long ago, but I thought it was a really good question. One of the benefits that we get as we get to travel around and work with horses is that we probably see more breeds, kind of more of a cross section of the horses out there than most people do, where most, you may be a Western pleasure horse trainer and you're going to train only stock horses and generally only from these bloodlines. And so what's out there in the world may not be something you're familiar with. So what are some of the experiences that you've had with some of these different breeds? How different do you find horses to be, or maybe even mules, or is there a pretty broad spectrum in your opinion, or what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's a funny thing because, character and uniqueness flows through all the different lines. So you get some horses, you can get different bloodlines that are, the characters are different. I genuinely love work ethic. I know some horses just have it more than others. That's to me, I'm just sitting here out my window and he's staring at me. He knows it's time, real close to time for feed, and he's just staring at me, and that's his deal. He's 24 years old now, and he's the hardest working horse I've ever had. When I worked full time, he would meet me at the gate every single morning, no matter how hard that day was. And so anyways, he's a big quarter horse. But I would trade work ethic over any breed in a second, even if they didn't have the real body for it. When it comes to, type, I find that some bloodlines are, kind of getting a little bit line bred, a little bit too much, where they're building on look off certain studs rather than, off of mind and the balance of breeding. That's starting to shift a little bit now. You're seeing that a lot of west in the quarter horse world, because they're starting to breed more for a little less for the showiness and, the Olympic winner, more so now for the everyday rider. There's a lot of that happening in the quarter horse world for us, where they're breeding really kind-minded horses that are really well built. That to me is just I've just been craving that. The amount of people who need the energy and the athleticism to be an Olympic athlete are just, that keeps us in business, but it's not valuable for the world. So loving that. That's happening in the quarter horse industry. Love the Lusitano and the Andalusians. That style of body is just so magnificent. Their bodies are already built to use themselves. One of my favorite combinations over the years has been a quarter horse Arab cross. To get that kind of stocky levelness out of the quarter horse, but then the life and vibrance of the Arab, to match that, to blend that together really nice. I've had a lot of fun and luck with that line. Train a bunch of Andalusians. Really love the athleticism, the capacity they have to sit. It's just so much more there than the quarter horses. Most of my quarter horses, I have to mentor their hamstrings because for them to sit and to use themselves, you gotta kind of bring them along, where an Andalusian they're already there. They just need to be, most of the things with the Andalusians is they need you out of their way, where with the quarter horses, they need to be mentored to do it, just with the different angles and conformation styles. Yeah, that to say that those are some of the lines I really like. And I just feel like it's a breath of fresh air for the breeding industry to shift a little bit away from building show horses, and everybody loving certain names, where people they ask your papers and they just love hearing certain names of these horses that are winning and they have big earnings. When 90% of our horse community shouldn't even touch those horses because they're just not built for them. So that's a shift I'm really happy to see. Not sure if that answered your question, but that's what it stimulated for me.
No, that's good. I've played with some of the Lusitanos as well, not very many, and a couple of Lipizzans. I have to say, I have honestly found them to be a little slower coming along than the horses that I'm used to. Just, not that they were ever really difficult, just everything was a little more regimented for them. They didn't blur any lines and just move up to the next step. But I haven't done hundreds of them by any stretch, so certainly it could just I'm far more used to the cutting bloodlines and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of love what you just said about people hearing this name and all. We've got some of these legendary horses, and I am old enough to have been around and ridden colts by some of them. And no, you want something about 5 generations removed from that, because what that first generation was like is not what you think it was going to be like. They were like some in your area. You may have some of that driftwood Hancock stuff, and you needed to be a man of iron to handle those things. You want that 9th generation. You don't want that first generation. So,
anyway. Right. Well, and you said that if you kind of felt that difference in the Andalusians and Lusitanos and how they start, and I truly like, I hear that, and I believe it's because of the history. In the classical world, they were brought around so slowly, and it was just about keeping them physically right and mentoring them mentally. So never taking their body away. And where the quarter horse breed has been bred to be able to get it done fast. Like, we the cold starting challenges, are a thing. And what do you see in those challenges? You see quarter horses. They're primarily quarter horse lines because the quarter horses have been bred to start quick. They've been bred to be able to come along fast, and because the line has been bred to sell 2-year-olds, and that promotes more of the industry. So they've got to be able to get it fast, to come around quickly, to be able to do the work quick, so then anything that's not coming like that is going to get cut out of the breeding. And where the Andalusians shoot in the history of that school system, those horses aren't even getting started till they're 5, and they're being mentored very slowly. They're keeping all the life and just slowly bringing the body along until they develop. But that history, I think, is really what retains the clarity you're speaking of. When you feel that difference, I think it's because of where they come from and the history of their purpose.
I had a conversation that I didn't intend for it to be an argument, but it kind of got that way. But it was with a dressage guy, and it was basically, I had asked him the simple question of, they tend to wait a very long time in training before they ever back a horse up. Whereas with me and the cutting horses, I mean, we're backing up big time, and right from the beginning. And I have found so much use in that. It really builds the hind end of the horse, and I find it pretty cool. You just mentioned about mentoring the hamstrings. I think that's kind of what it is. We all, through all that backing, we physically develop that hind end where those horses really can squat and can sit down there and hold, which takes a tremendous amount of strength from a horse to be able to hit that stop and squat and hang there waiting on that cow to move. But I have to say, I have noticed as you ride some of these warm blood type breeds, they will hit that collection stride pretty early on without you really having to work for it, even though you might have had to work for some other things. And I think that confirmation and all, that's why the English world devalues the tool of backing a horse, in my belief, is because their horses are just built in such a way that they don't have to build that part of them up. We have to work on it a lot more than they do. Thus, we've found a tool that they don't really require. But anyway, I just thought interesting.
I agree. Yeah. And I also feel like there's generally certain things the Western world is okay with, and there's certain things that the dressage world is not okay with. And sometimes there's trade-offs. If it's done right, you don't see any difference. But a lot of times what happens is, like a lot of these, horses are, they'll, when we're backing them, early, they can get overbent and they can be doing things that the the dressage world might think that shouldn't, we shouldn't be seeing that at this stage. So it's like, sometimes it's situational. It shouldn't be happening, but it's happening maybe in the majority. And most of the time we make judgments on majority negatives. So if a person's going to be backing a horse early, well, one person over here that doesn't like that, it's because they've seen the problem often enough to say you shouldn't do that. Yeah. Well, the way I look at it is, generally I've come to this now, is that everything we look at, you need to look at the pro and the con. And that's the quickest way to stop an argument. Is it's like, shoot, you know what? You are talking about your pro, but you're also focusing on my con. So let me share with you, and I agree with you on my con, because you're right. And if I'm not careful, I'm going to blend myself into that con. And here's my pro. Okay, and then that's your pro, and hey, there's your con. And now we're both on page where you can see my pro and con, we can see your pro and con, and I've learned from your pro, and you know what? I have made judgments about your con because I've seen people doing that. And you know what? That's maybe on me, and I've learned something. And I hope you've learned from me on, here's what we were intending, and here's what can go wrong. It's amazing. I have fun with this, actually, is to diffuse conflict based on pro-con observations. And it's because most of the time we can only conflict because we're both right. I'm focusing on my pro, you're focusing on my con. I'm focusing on your con, you're focusing on your pro. We're both right the whole time, so there's no winner. But if we can break that down, it's amazing. It's like, you know what, you're right. And you watch people say, dang, you're right. I am focusing on your negative. And it's like, well, just because that's the negative doesn't mean that's what I'm trying to represent. Anyways, kind of a fun thing.
Yeah. You should never judge something based upon its misapplication, right? So looking at only the con and painting the whole world with that is one of the last podcasts that we interviewed was with a lady that does nothing but positive reinforcement training.
Okay.
And I have a certain view on that, but that's basically because most of this time when I've seen that done, it's been done very poorly. It doesn't mean that it can't be done well, and where all of these things I'm concerned with, they go, yeah, but I'm not gonna, follow down that path. So
yeah.
Anyway,
exactly.
Good conversation.
Yeah, you betcha.
Well, Josh, I think we've chewed a lot of ground here. I'm not real sure where else to go with you. That won't be another 30-minute conversation, and I know it's kind of getting late. I got it's about 10 minutes before bedtime for my kids right now. So, is there anything else you want to touch on? We of course, I'll let you plug your website and social media stuff again real quick, and we'll definitely link to all of that in the show notes where people can find you and everything. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that again?
Yeah, joshnichol.com, JOSHNICHOL.com is our website. And you can find us on YouTube as well. Our membership site is attached to the website. So if you're interested in any of my work, that's the way to dive into it. We have presence on Facebook and Instagram, and try to spend a bunch of time allowing people to feel my work through that. Our business page, Josh Nichol, A Horseman's Pursuit. That's the business page where, anybody can like it and share the content there. And yeah, I've appreciated our time. Thanks for having me. It's been great to visit. And now, shoot, when we get to that conference, it'll feel like we know each other already.
Absolutely. I'll have a whiskey with you on Friday night or something. Oh, I know one other thing I wanted to talk about with you real quick. Inside hind leg pivot turns. So as a classical horseman, why are we still doing this? From my cutting horse days, I can tell you that is absolutely not the best way to get from going this direction and turn and go that direction. Yet this is one of these things we hold very dear. So in your opinion, is there still a practical application for that, or am I just totally off base? And what do you think?
Yeah, for me, it's funny because I don't feel like I'm married to a way on that one. But what I do find is I find that it all depends on what you're intending to do next. And I feel like that's where that comes from. So, I'm learning a little bit about your work coming from the cutting horse industry. You're wanting to roll a horse back so that they can roll over their hip and go the other direction. Well, you're hardly ever going to see a dressage horse ever consider that type of movement. So then it seems fine then for them to a turn, planting that inside hind and roll and doing it that way, because they're not intending to roll that deep and cut through or go kind of lean backwards in the process of the turn. So sometimes I feel like it's because of what you're intending to do with it. So for me, I like to think about engaging legs and stabilizing legs, and then next step movements. So then, each thing might have a little bit of a pro, and they might maximize that little pro, but they've got a lot more con. But if the movement is to roll and explode, shoot, there's going to be a hind leg you're going to need to be ready on. But one leg engages, the other leg supports. And then, for myself, I play with developing the inside hind, developing the outside hind. So I'm stabilizing the horse to balance and straightness. And then I get my horses to a place pretty quick where each horse is going to kind of favor something through that turn, and they're going to want to sit a certain way. And I'm going to try to, outside of it being some major counter resistance, that would be the extreme of this conversation. Each horse is going to set up a little different, but generally, if you're trying to roll a horse through, they're going to want to sit a certain way. And if you're always moving forward, which is what the dressage world will always talk about, you've talked about backing. Well, the dressage world, that's like a sin initially, because the horse needs to be forward, forward. And I think that's where that's the knife's edge right there, is because they're they're thinking about it from an entirely different motive or application. They're never thinking about, like for generally speaking, and I know some dressage riders are going to get upset with me when I say this, generally speaking in dressage, you're doing a 10 meter circle. When you ever get down to the pirouettes, you're turning really tight, but you're always forward, always forward. Well, from the cow horse side, we need a horse to roll back and turn like pretty quick, or you're not functioning any use. So I think that's the heartbeat of it. I think that's the heartbeat of the conversation is that the intended application changes what they believe is necessary. So for me in the process, I look at that inside hind as an engaging and an outside hind leg as a stabilizing. So both those legs need to be able to be really close to each other. The forward movement allows for the horse to kind of be engaging and pushing up and over, which is classically sound. It just starts to get muddy when we start looking for higher activations of self-carriage. If you're intending to coil, load, and snap, it starts to bring on a different, because it's almost like you're contradicting conversations then, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think we just need to bring back dueling. And if we had two dressage riders who had to, attack each other with swords, and all of a sudden turning around and getting back over there was important, then they'd figure it all out. But because this is one of my primary actual issues with the turn. If let's say we're going to go down here and we're going to stop and we're going to turn left, and we wanted to then depart on the left lead, you cannot do that with an inside hind leg pivot turn smoothly because the hind feet are set up incorrectly. So at minimum, the horse has to take one step and then can depart. And that one step is a killer. Whereas if they turn on the outside hind leg and draw the inside hind back, they are primed and ready to take the first step right into the lead, and boom, there you go. Which is, I guess it's an efficiency thing, but that whole forward through a turn is one of those. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard for me to watch horses do that. Right. Anyway, that's my pet peeve.
Well, and I think I hear you, and I feel like again, it's one of those things for me where when if the horse is coming forward and they're activating coming forward and is at all overflexing the neck or bracing their back, it's impossible. And what a horse is doing by when they're sitting in the field, because again, when you're talking about a horse sitting back and coming through that the back up into the turn, you're waiting on a feel. Well, they could also look at somebody backing their horse and saying, well, that horse is kicking their hindquarters out. And, but there's a feel to those things. And I recognize that because I watch the classical work, the dressage and classical work, it's pretty similar. But the heartbeat behind the classical system is different because generally most of the classical masters aren't showing. They generally don't care to show. They're just exhibiting. They do exhibitions where they're just showing the work. So they're not trying to kind of package things up. But man, if you get that horse where they don't sit back and they're not using their back legs, they're not bending their back legs, it just wrecks anything.
Yep. Well, all right. Well, man, I have enjoyed the talk with you very much. I am looking forward to meeting you and having a whiskey with you or whatever when we get to the summit. And like I say, we'll put out this podcast right before the summit, and hopefully the world just eats it up. So thank you again, man.
Good deal. Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too wacky or anything for you, but I feel like we got into some pretty high level talking there. Most of the time people are less willing to do that than you were. So kudos to you for it, man. I'm certainly looking forward to meeting you face to face.
You betcha. Well, thanks a lot.
Yes, sir. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.